We are in the prophets today, boys and girls. Jeremiah chapter 33, verse 15 and 16. And again, here on day 31, we're going to continue looking at the surrounding context, the literary context of this passage to interpret, hopefully, the meaning of this passage as best as we can. And I realize that in the last few videos, there hasn't been a lot of interpreting of the data, but you have to understand that's part of the interpretation process, is to think through how a passage relates to the passages that come after, the passages that come before, how it relates to whatever testament it's in and whatever book it's in, the whole Bible, and then that will really bring clarity and precision to the meaning of that passage. Not that you can't know the meaning without knowing the surrounding context and how it relates to the rest of the Bible, but it is helpful for sure, and it will bring your understanding even deeper. So let me show you here in Jeremiah 33, verse 15 and 16, as we continue to interpret this data. This is a prophecy that comes through Jeremiah. It says, in those days, he's talking about a future day, and at that time I will cause, what? A righteous branch to spring up for David. Now I'm just highlighting some things that stand out to me to help me figure out what the meaning of this passage is. And he shall execute justice and righteousness in the land. In those days, Judah will be saved. Jerusalem will dwell securely. And this is the name by which it will be called. Well, the Lord is our righteousness. So here, the prophet Jeremiah, or God through Jeremiah, is promising that there is a good future for the nation of Israel, should they actually believe and look to the Lord as their God, that there is a good experience waiting for them, that God is not done with Israel. In fact, there will be a day and a time when a righteous branch, which seems like will just be a descendant from David, will actually dwell and in the land rule and execute justice and righteousness in the land that really no king has done prior, at least well. You have David, you have Solomon, you have these images of, or glimpses into a good king, but no one's a perfect king. There's a perfect king coming from the line of David who's called a righteous branch, and he will have justice and righteousness, and in his days, Judah will be saved. So this is talking about a future restoration, a future salvation for Judah, for the land, not just for Jerusalem, but it's specifically, addressing Jerusalem. And so the city of Jerusalem will actually be called the Lord is our righteousness, because of this righteous branch that springs up from David, who will actually rule and reign with perfect justice and righteousness in the whole land. So this is a promise. The simple surface level meaning is that God has a future for Israel, for Jerusalem, where a righteous king that comes from David will reign perfectly. And that city will actually be identified with this king, who is a reminder, or even the substance of this statement, that the Lord is their righteousness. Okay, so when we think about the surrounding context and trying to figure out the meaning of this, the Lord will go on to talk about how there will never be lack a man to sit on the throne of David in Israel, right? That even if the people of Israel break the covenant, that his covenant with David won't be broken. So God's talking about his faithfulness to David and his house, even if Israel is not faithful to the covenant of God. God has made a promise to David that is not based on Israel's performance. He's going to do it even if they fail. And this righteous branch is going to come. That's what comes after this little section. Now, this is talking about the surrounding passage. The main context or point of this passage is that God has made an eternal covenant with David, and we know that Jesus will actually be the one to finalize that and fulfill that. He's the one that promise is mainly about. And then before this little section about the Lord's eternal covenant with David, before that, right, the Lord is talking about how the place of Jerusalem currently is a waste, and there's actually it's a habitation that is without man or beast. It's currently in a state of desolation. It's in a state of barrenness and death, really. But God promises that there's a future for Israel, for Jerusalem, where the righteous king will come and reign forever. He's going to be the fulfillment of God's covenant with David, right? So then we can plug this little verse, these little two verses, into what comes before it and what comes after it, right? And so if you zoom out a little bit, just a little bit, the whole point of this little section is that God has made an eternal covenant with David. And then you zoom out even more, right, to the whole, prophecy of Jeremiah. Jeremiah is sent to Jerusalem and Judah to warn them of the impending doom, to warn them that their sins are going to be punished. And then it ends kind of on this cliffhanger that God is going to bless and restore the fortunes of Jerusalem and Israel, but that hasn't yet happened. They're still in exile when the prophecy of Jeremiah comes to a close. And so Jeremiah's prophecy, the main point is that, really, Israel, Jerusalem has failed, and there's punishment, but God is not done with them. He intends to restore a remnant and work with that remnant to bring about this righteous king who will come from the line of David. Then you zoom out a little more, and you say, how does this passage relate to the whole Old Testament? Remember, the Old Testament is really the Old Covenant. It's God's agreement, his terms and conditions with a specific family and a specific nation to do a specific thing. They failed to uphold that end of their end of the covenant, and the Old Testament is all about their journey of repeating failure, but God brings about this righteous branch even through and in the midst of that failure. Then you zoom out a little more and you go, what's the whole point of the Bible? God's story of redemption, centered around his son Jesus. And so how does this relate to that? Well, the righteous branch is Jesus. The day is coming when he will reign. The salvation comes from him. This is part of God's way of redeeming not just Israel and Judah, but God redeeming the whole of humanity, those who actually, would trust in him for salvation and righteousness. And so this promise, for sure, the city is in mind here. The Lord is our righteousness. That's what, the city will be called by. But really, the people of God, anyone who trusts in Jesus for salvation, this blessing is extended to them, that the Lord becomes their righteousness. And so, you can zoom out even more and go, this whole covenant with David is not just for Judah and Israel, it's going to benefit humanity, right? And so Jeremiah brings a warning of the impending doom, tells them their time has come, the punishment has come, but even though Jerusalem is made a waste, God intends to work through that to bring future restoration, future salvation that comes attached to this promised king that comes from David, this promised king who actually will be the fulfillment of this covenant, and that's Jesus. So, you could zoom out more and more and look at all the details, and that's exactly what you're going to do in today's homework, is you're going to look at this passage in depth, these two verses, read through it, pray about it, meditate on it, think through these things. How does it relate to, Jeremiah 33? How does it relate to the main point of Jeremiah's prophecy? How does it relate to the whole Old Testament? Not every verse in the Old Testament, but the main point of the Old Testament. And then write down your thoughts. I'd love to see those. And then what you're going to do is when you read your Bible today on day 31, think through whatever you're reading, okay? How does it relate to whatever comes after it and whatever comes before it and everything else that surrounds it? And it's going to really help you begin to interpret the meaning of this, whatever passage you're reading. For instance, the meaning of this passage is that God intends to save and redeem through this righteous branch, not just Judah and Jerusalem, but really through that king, all of humanity who, identifies with God as their righteousness. So I'll see you guys in day 32 when we continue interpreting the Bible.